My name is Jocelyn Sansing. I am your local public library director. I'm the lucky library director who gets to be the manager of this wonderful library. There is restrooms right across the street, or across the street. Let's try that again. Right across the hall. Water is down the hall by the elevator and stairs, should you need any. We are recording to this program this evening. The camera is in the back, so we're not getting anything in the audience except the back of your heads, perhaps. And this will be available online later. This is a really special program for me tonight because I was a student of Platteville High School from 1994 to 1998. And Mrs. Kies was one of my English teachers. I was also good friends with two of her kids, Lauren, and the late great Kelly, aka Goop, whom I graduated with. My memories of my English classes with Mrs. Kies and Mrs. Jonas are some of the most vivid and memorable memories of all of my high school time, and I'm not just saying that. High school was the first public school that I ever attended, and Mrs. Kies was the first teacher who talked to me like I was an adult. And that really made a really big impact on me because she respected my opinion, she was interested in what I thought, and she wanted to know my perspective. And that was the first time that anyone of authority in a school setting had ever really given me that respect, and it changed things for me. Her reading list opened my mind to the world and got me to move on from Daniel Steele in my romance days. Not that there's anything wrong with Daniel Steele. In her classes, we read classics like The Scarlet Letter, Huckleberry Finn, All Quiet on the Western Front, books with tough, controversial topics that we wanted to know about, but didn't know how to find or explore. This was before the internet. And Mrs. Kies led us through those discussions with curiosity and knowledge. This helped to ignite my love of reading, and of course I didn't know it at the time, but I look back on it now, and my high school English teachers are one of the reasons that I was drawn to librarianship and intellectual freedom, and will defend the right to read for the rest of my career. So, Sue, reading your memoir was a blast from the past. So many names I had forgotten. Toilet papering situations at a certain coach's house that I may or may not have been involved in. It brought back a lot of memories, and so I'm just so excited to share this full circle moment. And who would have thought that 20 years later, here we are, student and teacher, having a full circle moment. So thank you so much. Thank you to Marja for being here, and please do your thing.
I want to make sure that people are able to hear us. Do I need to turn?
Yep, right here.
We'll get that out of the way.
I don't know how to work this either. So you might have
Right to
to,
your belt there.
Okay.
you might have to coach me.
No problem.
I think that's from the sound of fumbling with this, so it should get better.
And can I just hold this or?
Yeah, or you can even put it in your pocket.
Oh, I can? Oh, that's perfect.
All right.
Okay. And then do I need, you turned it on?
Sure.
You turned it off and I just wondered if it's on
Thank
again.
you for your patience. Yep, you're on.
All right, thank you.
Yep, and there will be time to ask questions at the end, and I'll walk around with the mic.
Welcome, everybody. I know some of you who were in one of my very first classes, I think the first one actually, with Sue, and have been meeting weekly, as I understand it, via Zoom for like a few years now, with really significant progress or completion of different projects people were doing. Let me speak more loudly, and if you need to remind me again, can you hear me better now? Okay, thank you. Hi. Thank you for letting us know. Let me try again. If I speak at this level, is that okay or still difficult? How about you, Sue? You try.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh.
Is that a matter of the unit, do you think?
Thank you for your
Kate seems to know.
Let's try moving it off of your sweater. Okay. Just moving around.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. That's better already? Thank you so much for letting us know before we went through all of this without good sound. And if anybody, I do have kind of a soft voice. If anybody has difficulty hearing me, please just shoot up an arm or something. I might need the reminder. Anyway, so there are people here, including one who right here who flew in from California, who were in that early class of mine and have continued meeting as a writing group all this time. One thing both Sue and I will do closer to the end after talking about her book is give you a few tips for those of you who have thought about writing memoirs or personal stories. Just give you a few tips on getting started or keeping going. And then we want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So we'll be sure to do that. And I believe Jocelyn has a microphone that she'll be able to take around so we can hear everybody else as well. We both are writers and teachers, although we've come at it on different paths. I grew up here in Madison, Wisconsin, went to West High School, lived in Platteville for a few years as a younger child, but then was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune for quite a few years and was assigned, I wrote a memoir because of an assignment I was given, which was to go to Monroeville, Alabama, a place I had not heard about. My editor asked me, want to take a trip? And I said, sure, where to? He said, Monroeville, Alabama. And I said, well, okay, what's there? Turns out that is the birthplace and where Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, had grown up. It was the model for Maycomb in the novel. It was a place where she continued to spend time with her equally fascinating oldest sister, Alice Lee. I got to know them. With their blessing, I spent time living right next door to them in Monroeville, and I wrote a memoir. It was not a biography of Nell Harper, as her friends call her, but it was a chronicle of getting to know her and her friends and family in that small southern town. My roots here are in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, which is 3,500, opposed to Monroeville is 7,000 people, but I still felt there, despite north and south and differences, there was something in both that I was so interested in learning more about. And then toured with my mother, Marja Mills, who is here, for close to a year on tour and speaking, and just found that a wonderful experience. Writing is solitary, and getting to speak to people about the book and their own views on things is wonderfully social. Sue was one of my first students. Someone asked me to teach a memoir writing class, and I did, and loved it, and have kept doing that. Sue was one of my very first students, and I'm always thrilled if I have an English teacher, which I often do in these Zoom classes, because if I ever am thinking twice about a question of grammar or literature, I know right who to ask. And Sue talks about her 30 years as a teacher at Platteville High School in her book, My Homecoming Dance. And let's get right to it. There's so many wonderful stories in there, and let's start with them. In fact, I think you have a reading
I do.
for us to start.
Yes, thank you. I thought I would start out with a small reading, and it's right at the beginning of the book. And it's about, are there any educators in here?
No
Okay.
doubt, yeah.
All right. You'll be able to relate to this, I'm sure, and other people will too, but educators particularly. And chapter 1 is called Riding the School Cycle. And one of my friends who retired before I did said that, I said, how is retirement? And she says, good, but the one thing is it's hard to get out of that cycle of school, you know? Fall comes and you think you're supposed to be going. And anyway, I thought I'd set the scene here just a little bit with what teachers kind of go through at the beginning of the year. So, riding the school cycle. On Monday, August 26th, 2019, I ambled onto the deck of our home, still in my robe. Coffee cup in hand, I watched yellow leaves spiral through the morning air. One landed in my hair and others, coated in dew, stuck to the soles of my slippers. For 27 years, the walnut trees in our backyard had been my work calendar. Leaves off, go to school. Leaves on, go to the pool. I hoisted my mug toward the trees. Sláinte, here's to my next life, I said. The birds scattered from the feeder, and I took a swig of coffee to celebrate. I had retired in June at the end of the school year, and this day was the first official day of my retirement. It was also the first in-service day for teachers and staff for the 2019-2020 school year. In the coming year, the pandemic and George Floyd's murder would cause our country and world much grief and turmoil. But for now, we remained innocently unaware. If still on the payroll, I would be arriving at school by 7:35 a.m. and heading down the beige halls to an in-service session at 8 o'clock. In previous years, the agenda included such workshops as designing active lessons, where we listened to the presenter lecture for 2 hours. By mid-morning, all Platteville School District teachers and staff would meet in the PHS auditorium. It was here in this space that I had played my clarinet in concerts, attended class meetings, tried out for major ed, and watched my classmates' productions of Brigadoon, The Sound of Music, Carnival, and Fiddler on the Roof. It seemed bigger then. However, the prickly brick walls still scraped bare elbows and drew blood if you inadvertently ran into them, and the red upholstered seats folded up and smacked you in the rear when you got up. As a student, I viewed my teachers as older, mature adults, role models. When I got to know the teachers I'd had as peers, I hesitated to address them by their first names. How could I call my algebra teacher Jerry or the French teacher Marie? As time passed and I worked with them day to day, I became more comfortable. Teachers were merely human, older versions of the students they taught. At the in-service gatherings, I joined the high school staff members clumped together in their usual spots according to sex and department in the back corner of the auditorium as if there were a seating chart. I remember one time at this all-district gathering when the middle school teachers paraded into the rows in front of us high school teachers, their matching bright blue t-shirts brandished an inspirational logo, PMS, Kids, PMS Hearts, Kids and Education. I rolled my eyes and shook my head at their prepubescent conformity and clueless use of acronyms. In front of them, the elementary teachers bellied up to the stage. Even a few had the audacity to raise their hands and ask questions. We grumbled at their lack of consideration. For those of us who just wanted to get the meeting over with and proceed to our rooms to prepare for the first day, I wondered if teachers' inherent personalities attracted them to teach a particular grade level, or if the transformation into acting like their students happened over time. The superintendent delivered his yearly monologue about the state of the district. Halfway through, a sound like a tire leaking air caught our attention. A muffled popping noise followed. After some covert head-turning, we traced the racket to Jane, a special education teacher. She had dozed off somewhere during the third slide of data. We didn't bother to wake her. Her sputtering and occasional gasps provided us with welcome comic relief and fodder for future ridicule. During my first years of teaching at PHS in the early 90s, the veterans grumbled incessantly about in-service. It's the same every year. Why can't we have more time in our rooms? My plate is already full. What does this have to do with teaching the kids? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, quit complaining already, I wanted to tell him. For 2.5 years, I worked as a substitute, teacher's aide, and part-time teacher, all paid diddly squat. I'm happy just to have a full-time job and benefits. Then, after enduring umpteen in-service trainings, I too got tired of administrators introducing us to new and improved ideas that were merely recycled methods disguised in pseudonyms. If I have to sit through another one of these sessions, my head is going to explode, I complained at lunchtime, a certified curmudgeon, just like my predecessors. Laced with buzzwords like Common Core and college and career readiness standards, the educational rhetoric in these in-service meetings was supported by a litany of alphabet goulash, like RTI, IEP, SIP, PBIS, SLO, and PPG. I remember taking a deep breath during my last year and thinking, OMG, TMI, please just let me teach the kids.
One of the things that really struck me reading this was when I picture a teacher, I think of them in the classroom, perhaps observing a moment when a student engages. But you make clear how much time is spent doing things other than that. And I think one reason for the impatience with all the other things that take your time during the day.
It's very true. I found out when I went into teaching, I think we all go in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and think, oh gosh, this is going to be so much fun. I'll have my own classroom. And it is fun, but you don't realize all the other things connected with it, the in-service and
Grading papers.
grading papers. Oh my heavens, if I could have gotten paid per hour what I had done in grading papers. Yes, it's a lot of stuff. All, teachers are like, these people that have to sift information not only for kids, students, administrators, parents. It all goes through the teachers, and it's a lot of work. And I think sometimes we don't realize it.
To the point where as I remember, you wrote, looking up and realizing you really hadn't given yourself time even to grab a bite of lunch or use the restroom.
It's true. There were days when I forgot to use the restroom, and I would think, oh my gosh, I better get there. This isn't, and just even to drink water, in my early days, I would be so busy, and it was very hard. And as I, matured as a teacher, I learned I had to take care of me, because if you don't take care of you, you don't have anything to give. And plus, as I got older, I needed more of that. So, young people can do a lot more than, they take on a lot more and can do a lot more. And then when I look back, I don't realize how I did all that. At one point in time, I think when Jocelyn was my student, I saw 140 students every day. So that was a lot of students. And you picture grading papers and planning lessons for all that many students and trying to keep track of, are they well taken care of? And, because if you don't meet their personal needs or their needs aren't met, just like me as a teacher, if kids, their student needs aren't met, like they haven't had enough to eat, they haven't slept or whatever, they're not going to be ready to learn either. So the teacher has to facilitate that as well. And I think schools and teachers are doing more and more of that.
One of the things I felt you gave us a kind of behind the scenes look at was the relationships among the teachers at the high school. You mentioned in there in your own school days the people who would go off to the teachers who would go off to their lounge and then they would come out trailing cigarette smoke. But other than that, it all seemed kind of mysterious what went on in there. And I was interested to read. I think as a student, you don't think about that so much. You mentioned that your students were always surprised to see you around town at the grocery store, for example, as if, oh, you exist outside.
They would. I'd see students at the grocery store or wherever. And it is, when you are a teacher in a smaller community, you become somewhat of a celebrity in a way. I mean, they see you places and they, talk to you and yell at you. I talk about that in the book too, one young man. I was walking with my daughter, and all of a sudden I heard, "Hey, Mrs. Kies," and I looked at McDonald's, and he had his head sticking out the drive-through window, waving and yelling at me, and my daughter said, "How do you stand this?" Everywhere, in a smaller town you go, you are recognized. So
And gossiped about.
And gossiped about, yeah. You have to mind your P's and Q's too, yeah.
Well, when it came to relationships among the teachers, I think you described your own evolution from being the younger teacher who was looking to others for warmth and understanding. That wasn't always what you got, but sometimes it was. And then as you went along, the way you were able to mentor and look out for some of the younger teachers. I think as a student in a classroom, just like you don't think about your teacher actually going to the grocery store or driving a car, you don't think about that aspect of it because you're teaching. We see you all teaching individually, but I think you do give us a sense of those relationships as very much a part of what your experience was as a teacher.
It's very true, and I don't think students quite connect that just like they have friends and peers and the teachers, we had fun and we had, I feel very lucky because I've heard of some places where the atmosphere isn't real good. But when I was teaching, I had a very, very good atmosphere to teach in, and my peers were wonderful and funny, and I talk about them in the book. And mostly supportive, but I had one teacher next to me who was old school, and he believed you had to make it on your own. You don't, he'd be there, but, you had to figure things out for yourself. And it took me a while to figure this guy out. And then it turned out we, are best friends or, peer friends. But anyway, that was Mr. Schaefer, Jocelyn. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, he was pretty tough and gave the newbies a hard time, kind of, because he felt like you had to, earn your ground and do what you needed to do to survive, kind of like thing. It's very old school, but
Well, and we see you giving tests of different kinds, standardized, others.
oh heavens, yeah.
Just a few of those, but also see how often you are tested by other teachers, certainly by students, and the ones that you can tell right off the bat are there
Oh,
to
it's true.
challenge you.
It's true.
I had the impression that you were often using humor to diffuse that, and when there's a question about who's going to have power in the classroom, and if it's going to be the kind of tease in the back, it seemed like again and again you were turning to humor as a way to diffuse that.
I do like humor, and I use it a lot in the book, you'll see. But I actually always, you always have that one kid or two that give you a hard time, kind of. And I always enjoyed that kind of, because it brought life to the class. Because when I first started teaching high school, some of them, they kind of sit there and look at you, wait for you to do something. At least someone who's kind of at least playing you a little bit, giving you a hard time, they're involved in some way, and then you can do something with that. Whereas those who aren't involved are harder to pull in. So yeah, kids, they would test you, especially at high school level, and there always was a student or two, and you did have to pass muster, and it didn't work. I found early on, it doesn't work to get into a power struggle with them. It just doesn't. So I learned that. I started out as a teacher's aide in Jane Schrader's class. And Jane, I devote a whole chapter to her in the book. She was a very good mentor. And when I graduated from UW Platteville in 1991, there were 250 to 300 applicants for every teaching job. So wherever I'd go, they were just, and I had a few interviews, but they were out of Platteville, which would have meant uprooting our family because I was a non-traditional student. We had 5 children. But we were willing to do it if I could find that right job, and nothing turned up. So then I worked as a teacher's aide. And boy, were my eyes opened. I worked with Jane, who was a special ed teacher, which was known then as ED, the emotionally disturbed kids, and now it's known as EBD, I think, and now...
More acronyms.
Yeah, more acronyms. I don't know even now, but... Cross-category. Is that what it's... Okay, cross-category? Okay. Well, anyway, I received more education working with her in that classroom than any college classroom ever could have taught me. She was very, very good at diffusing situations and not buying into power struggles and not letting anger take over. Because I've seen other teachers, where a kid makes you mad and you want to respond with anger, and it's not going to work. It doesn't work. And Jane helped teach me that. So I'm not saying I never got angry, but I knew that it didn't work. So I tried not to. But yeah.
Yeah. Jocelyn was mentioning in talking about the influence that your teaching had and your reading lists, the issue of what is available for kids and adults to read in libraries, and especially, I think in your case, in schools. And that is something you came up with against a number of times. Huckleberry Finn came up, Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings came up. And I think, as you point out, that isn't new. There have been challenges for a long time, but it does seem like we're in a climate now, political climate and sort of cultural climate, where that is something that a lot of teachers and librarians are having to deal with. And I wonder if you could just give people an example of that issue arising in your own teaching life and what you felt was a good way to respond.
Um, I firmly believe that teachers should be in charge of, along with talking to other people, but English teachers should choose the books that students are going to read. If there's, a problem with it or something, I'm always open to talking about it, or I was, and I think most people are. And there were times along the way when a parent would say, oh, I don't really want my child reading this book. And I totally think that's a good thing to have. Parents should have a say. And then what that means is the parent is active in what the child is doing. And I love that. And then what I would do is offer that student another book to read. And they could read that book, and the rest of the class would go on with the other. But we did have a case where there were a couple parents who didn't like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings because of it's a paragraph, actually, or less, in Maya Angelou's autobiography where she was raped by her stepfather. And parents, and it really even wasn't that graphic. I mean, you knew what was going on, but their parents did not want the whole class reading this book. And so, of course, as happens when something is questioned, everybody started reading the book. The school board was reading it. The kids they heard what was going on, they were reading it. And then they're reading it without the guidance then of a teacher, which to me isn't a good thing. And whenever I would teach that book, through my years of teaching that book, I had was it 2 or 3 young women, I mean, this stuff happens, we can't just deny it, who had been raped, had problems, in their house, or it was awful to hear this, and then I would refer them to the guidance counselor, of course, and some of them had already been there. They just wanted to share with me that this had happened, and that reading a book like this to see that how Maya Angelou got through it, and that was helpful to them. So denying that stuff doesn't exist, to me, doesn't help with the, censoring things for kids. And Huckleberry Finn, such a classic as that. I mean, when I taught it, I would address why the N-word was used in there, and that's one of the biggest reasons, and that it was, banned. And that's because Mark Twain used the word because that's the word they used then. He's capturing it. Now, did we say it out loud in the classroom? No, we wouldn't do that, but they could read to themselves and figure things out and understand. And so we would talk about that. And there were other things too, other books, there would be something controversial. And students are very aware of a lot of things that we don't give them credit for. They're more mature than we think they are. And I guess the other irony, besides the book becoming, Mark Twain said, when people would censor his book or say, no, you can't read it, that'll sell 1,000 or 10,000 more copies, But the other irony is that today, students carry around a telephone with them. They have a computer, access to the internet. Everything they'd ever want to know and find out is there. And then I think we're censoring books. I mean, these are things that have gone through publishers and editors. At least there's some semblance of, somebody watching over what's going out there. But on the internet, there's nothing. So that's my 2 cents on that. I just think English teachers should be able to choose the books students read. I really do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a number of national issues, including that one that surfaced for you. And another one was the desire on the part of schools, and often mandate, to prepare for something like a bomb threat or, God forbid, a school shooter. And yet you also talk about how disruptive that was. So maybe give us an example of that as well, and where you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges schools face today is trying to, you know, keep kids safe and teachers safe and schools safe because of, you know, the rampant use of guns out there. Not that guns are always bad, but, you know, when they're used for that purpose, they sure are. We had 3 bomb threats in 1 year, and the young man who finally it came out that he was responsible for these bomb threats, I never would have believed that he did this. But I think I don't know why he did it exactly.
I thought that is interesting. It was not who you would have
No,
guessed. That
it
turned
wasn't
out to
at
be
all.
Yeah.
And I'm going to connect this idea with another one that I also think through experience, I guess, and seeing a change from the schools that students' mental health needs attention at a really, I think we ought to start. The world has changed. Families no longer live close together and have support systems, and I don't know, it's just changed. We're no longer an agricultural society. I guess we haven't been for a while, but it used to be students had roots in something or somewhere. They belonged. And I think there are a lot of students out there who, from a very young age, feel like they don't belong. And I think bullying has existed since the beginning of time, and I'm not okaying it at all. But I do think kids used to be better prepared to take on the bully than they are now.
You said something interesting I've been thinking about since you said that to me, which was that you felt students now, and this is the perspective of somebody who taught for 3 decades, that students now maybe possess more knowledge or breadth of knowledge, but perhaps also less EQ or whatever you would want to call it than previous generations.
Yeah, I did say that. I just think, as far as intellectual learning, maybe not deep understanding of things, but they have access to information galore. I mean, they know more than we did. I think I can say that when we were young. They just know lots of stuff because it's all there for them. But the emotional intelligence and you know, that takes developmental time.
Human interaction that's
And
different
human
than screen
interaction.
time.
Yeah. The screen time has taken over. I don't think a lot of students don't have touch with nature like they used to. I remember bringing up, because my husband and I used to farm, I brought up something in class one day about our farming experience. Like, I don't know if it was growing crops or feeding calves, baby calves, I can't remember. And the one student said, "What's that?" They had no clue about what I was talking about even.
Where their food comes from.
Where the food comes from, what goes on a farm. And when I was in high school, if you didn't live on a farm, you at least maybe worked on a farm or visited a farm. And anymore, I just don't think that happens. And I think the belonging, the being grounded, I think a lot of students are missing that now. They want to belong. They want to feel, you know, like they matter and they're part of something. And that's why I think the mental health aspect is important to address at a very young age.
And even some of the kind of dangerous, I think, cultural currents in terms of the political divide and people sometimes joining extreme groups
It's
that
a way
form
of belonging.
along those identities. Yeah.
And I'm no expert, but that's just what I've observed. But I did see, like, students who were kind of loners or whatever, and they're really kind of ripe for that idea of joining something a little more because they didn't feel like they belonged in the mainstream at all. So,
and that whole question of how discerning any of us, even as people who've been adults for a very long time, but students too, that ability to discern the quality of the information that's coming at you. What's the source? Is it reliable?
Right.
That kind of thing.
I did for the last few years of teaching. I taught a class called Media Literacy, and students really enjoyed that. It was an English elective that they could do. And we would examine things, you know, like how do you know something's real? How do you know they're telling the truth? Or how do you verify what you find out? So, and then they themselves would kind of make little movies or things that, you know, where they could fool other people. So they were kind of learning about what's out there on screens and all that by observing and then making their own. So.
You know, it's interesting. You talk in the book about all the different things you didn't expect to find yourself doing. And one of them, in an issue that I think would be familiar to almost everybody here in Madison and in Middleton and around the state, was when Act 10 under Governor Scott Walker was a huge issue. You write about that in here, and one thing you say, you quote the Badger Herald from 1923. You write about being a protester on the Capitol Square, and I'd like to have Sue talk about that a little bit more, and what you feel was lost when that public collective bargaining, if that's the right way to characterize it, went away. You quoted this article from the Badger Herald where somebody said, by passing Act 10, we put a small dent in our budget deficit and put a massive issue in our education system. And he goes on to say that now Wisconsin is 5th in the nation when it comes to teaching vacancies, only losing to Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. Adjusting for population moves us to 3rd even. So maybe just refresh people's memories about what happened with that and your own view of it, briefly.
Yeah, I never was too involved in politics before Act 10. I mean, I voted. I always vote. And I can remember my parents having discussions about politics and, oh, you don't tell who you're going to vote for. And, you know, kind of you keep that to yourself and that kind of thing. But then when Act 10 came along, it just lit a fire under me because
And remind people again what that was.
Act 10 was the budget repair bill that Governor Scott Walker had proposed and then ended up passing to limit collective bargaining for public employees, or take away public, I'm saying that all wrong. Take away collective bargaining, and also public employees. He painted this picture of teachers who made all this money, and the other people out there were paying their insurance and paying, you know, for their health insurance and retirement. Yeah, taxpayers and those not, you know, in public institutions and working public workers. And what he didn't emphasize, which really made me angry, is because I would hear our negotiators, they would go in to negotiate and they would come out of negotiations with better insurance for us. We couldn't get more money for you, but we got better insurance because it's more affordable for the district. So we get better insurance, we got just some better retirement and blah, blah, blah. So then when Scott Walker came in, he said that, you know, they've got all this wonderful insurance, they've got all these benefits, you know, my gosh, you pay your own. So anyway, he painted the picture that public employees were just treated like, you know, kings and queens, and it just was a false picture. And then he got everybody, and it actually happened in our own teacher's lounge. There were a couple people who didn't understand, you know, and I don't want to get hugely political, but they're Republicans, and by golly, Republicans are fiscally conservative, and we do the right thing. You know, that's just how they saw the world. And they would ask us at lunch, you know, most of us who were grumbling about Act 10 and going up to protest, they would get upset because, why are you doing this? You know, when you're given a job to do, you just do it and you don't complain, and why are you doing this? And we try and explain to them And they said, well, he's just balancing the budget is what he's doing. Well, now we have this great big, there's a lot of money now, apparently, that Wisconsin has. And I think, well, people should thank teachers and other public employees for putting this money in because that's where it came from. I know a 2-teacher family, it cost them $16,000 a year when Act 10 passed. The next year, they made $16,000 less money. And that's not counting the retirement benefits. That was what they had to pay in and how their pay was cut and what they had to pay into their insurance benefits. So,
and then, there's always the question of maybe hard to quantify, but impossible to ignore how valuable a really good teacher's ability to engage with students, whatever it is they're going to go on to do, blue, white collar, some mix of the two. It's hard to put a dollar figure on that, but in human and even just straight financial terms, clearly it's a valuable thing. And then the question of how do you attract all the people you want in classrooms teaching kids to the profession when it becomes tougher financially.
And now it has become tougher to get people to go into teaching because of this. Governor Walker's Act 10 was a punch to the stomach of all public employees, particularly teachers. And now I know when we have an opening, at least at Platteville High School, we're lucky to get 1, 2, 3 applicants. It's really changed things. And another thing that has changed because of that is because we can't collectively bargain, also involved in collective bargaining wasn't just the money and benefits. It was also what goes on in your classroom, how many students you can have in your classroom, what kind of help do you need in that classroom. At least before, you'd sit at the table and you could talk that out, and can we get, a teacher's aide in here to help with this, or can we, now we don't have that. And some schools operate okay, others don't. It's just, the consistency is gone. I've also seen at Platteville High School, and I can only attest to this, and I think it goes on in other schools too, is that teachers, we used to be able to, sit there and bargain, and teachers had a pay scale. Okay, you work your way up the pay scale by getting more education, more experience. But then after Act 10, what happened is administrators could pay teachers kind of what they wanted. So the technology teacher who comes in with 0 experience and actually initially no education credits, has a degree, but no education credits, but they need a technology teacher, right? But most people in these technology areas can go out and make tons of money somewhere else. So why do they want to be a teacher? So now they offer these teachers in technology, math, science, more money than, say, like an English teacher, a music teacher, or an art teacher, because where music and art teacher, people who are majoring in that going to go, okay? So now it's made it very lopsided, which also pits teachers against each other and takes away that cooperative attitude that it takes to teach kids on a, like I said, when I was at the high school, we teachers had a wonderful camaraderie. We had each other's backs. Now it's just a whole different atmosphere because there are people who are bitter over certain things. There are things that aren't fair.
And that's the kind of thing I think where you read about policy changes, but it's hard to know all the ways those echo into the lives of teachers and then of students. I want to make sure that we have time to take any questions people have. So let's do that now. I wanted to mention one thing briefly, and that is when I was asking you about what reforms or innovations you would like to see if you were made, the person who's able to do that. And you mentioned one thing you would advocate for would be a mandatory year of national service. That's an idea that's been revisited over the years, but you tied it in part to the idea of some of your students you felt needing experience in the world and also experience getting along with all different types of people and backgrounds, and some on-the-job experience that you felt would better prepare them for then whatever would be next. I think because we're running out of time, I'll just throw that out there. If people want to know more, ask now, or you could talk to Sue afterwards. But let's go ahead and go to questions. I'm pained by all the wonderful stories in here I'm not able to ask you about yet, but so be it. We'll be available after if people have more questions. Does anybody have a question for Sue?
I want to add, before you go to questions, just a real brief thing that I wanted to say is that one of the biggest things that I've seen as a change is there's such a divide in the haves and the have-nots. We have no middle anymore, like in schools. There are kids that haven't been out of our area, they're economically deprived. They may have a cell phone, but they haven't seen anything other than just where they're at because their parents can't take them on a vacation or can't. And then you have the other end of kids who do a lot of things. Their parents are able to, buy them what they need and then some. The middle is kind of missing, I notice, and I notice it in achievement. The economics affect the achievement. I don't know what we do about that, but that's why I brought that up to Marja, is that year of service afterward. If everybody would do this, maybe they would see and learn some things. I just think it would be a good thing for students to grow up a little bit between high school and university, where they have to kind of feel like they have to pick a major.
And we talked about all the students that don't go to university. I think here at Middleton High, it's a large percentage that do. But I know in Black River Falls, where I'm living now, a lot of kids aren't college bound. And the former principal of the high school there was telling me how important he thinks it is for schools to work with community colleges, for example, for kids to know it's not McDonald's or law school, that there are jobs maybe as a med tech. I think a lot of them are in healthcare. Some of them are in the traditional trades, plumbing, electrician, that will remain in demand and often can command salaries that probably are better than some of the college-bound tracks might lead to. I mean, depending on what is right for that person, but the importance of preparing kids for what they sometimes call blue and white striped collar jobs, that where maybe a community college degree or some study and an apprenticeship to a plumber or an electrician might be a good path for that person. So one more thing. Again, anybody have questions? Anybody want to start us out here? Yes, Kate.
Start with a general one, and then maybe if there's time later, I have a really specific one.
If I could
Kate is another former and perhaps.
mic real quick so we
Yeah.
can get you in the question and recording.
Thanks. Well, I wanted to know, I've also been involved in some of Marja's classes, and I was really surprised to learn how much I learned about myself by writing and making connections that I hadn't foreseen. So I wanted to know from you, what did you learn about by writing, either influences or whatever?
That's a really good question. Writing is my therapy. I'll always write. I learned so much to put things in perspective. I may start out writing a little story, but then deeper things kind of rise from that. It's just amazing what you learn about yourself when you do that. I also learned that writing a book is really hard. It's a lot of work. It really is when you get to the point where you want other people to see it. But yeah, I don't know as far as anything specific that I learned, but there was so much I learned.
Well, and you guys maybe remember this from class and some of the other students who are here. We both said that we would try to toss out some tips about writing memoirs, or even if you're just thinking about it, or other personal stories that can be shorter. And I think one thing is it's often so intimidating for people to think about a whole life, maybe of a relative of yours or your own, or even a whole childhood or career, or something that still seems like, how do you get a handle on it? And oftentimes, people do well by narrowing in a little bit more on a couple of aspects of what they might want to write about. And a couple of tips I usually share with students is, one, it is so daunting to where do you even begin? Think of all the family stories you might like to see preserved. And it makes you want to take a nap or toast a bagel because who knows where to start? And so I think a good thing to do is think of one good story you know you would like preserved for others in your family or to share with others in your profession. Just one good story that is naturally one you would maybe tell over dinner to somebody, and start with writing that. You will then have something on the page. It'll give you a sense of what it's like to write one of those stories and then another and another. You can get a sense of, is this something you want to do? I also advise people, Anne Lamott is famous for advising the writer and writing instructor to write a shitty first draft, or at least not to be afraid of a shitty first draft. That if you try to hone every sentence, it takes too long and it's kind of stifling. That just get it down on paper, knowing that nobody else has to see that rough draft. You're going to come back and streamline it and find just the right words. You're just kind of getting some of the bones down. And I think that too is kind of a path forward. And the other tip I would quickly share, and I want to hear yours, is, and this is maybe self-serving because I love the community that has developed around these classes I've been teaching, but writing is solitary, and if you can hook up with a class or form a writing group with some other people, or start going maybe to some book festivals and find a writing community, and ideally at least a couple of people who can buoy you when you're discouraged, that you can, show your writing to one another. It adds so much to life, I think, and certainly to the writing that you're doing at hand. The final thing, and that kind of relates to your question, Kate, is I think a lot of my students have found that if they try to focus on the nature of something when they're writing, it gives sort of the meaning to the story. In other words, if you're writing about a friendship, you might want to reflect on kind of the nature of friendship in general, or the nature of that kind of friendship. If you reflect, I think a lot of times when we're reading books, those are the little nuggets that kind of stay with us and kind of, I've had that thought, but I've never quite put it into words. Or the nature of grief, the nature of marriage. I mean, just about anything you can think about. Even the nature of living with nature, as Kate has written beautifully about. Why don't you share a couple, and then let's take a couple more questions, and then we'll be available after. Before Sue does that, you had a question.
Okay, so I'm curious, when you wrote, did you use real names or did you make up names?
Yes,
And how
this is
did
a
you
question
make
many
that
people have,
decision
yeah.
as to whether or not this would embarrass people or whatever?
You mentioned a friend who's thought about writing a memoir but feels she would need to leave town and move elsewhere if she did so. So how did you handle that?
That's a really good question because I struggled with that. And my editor really helped me hone in on it. So she said that since I'm writing about public figures, some of them who are principals and such, either you just describe or you have to name them. You can't give them a fake name, apparently. So they either have their real name or I just didn't mention them. And I'm hoping, I've heard from some, and I haven't heard any negatives, so far I'm good. All students' names, other than those who passed away, because she also helped me with that. And I didn't say anything negative about them. I do a whole chapter on losing students. I lost our son, about loss, and that's something that kids deal with. But anyway, they all have their real names. All the other kids' names I changed. I wanted to protect their identities. So principals and I think all the teachers too, I either checked with them or knew that, I could use their names. But that's a good question. That was tough for me because when I went through and I made everybody fake names. And then my editor said, well, you can't you've got to have some of them in there with their real names. So
And I think it's important, no matter what you do, certainly this is true in journalism, but in other kinds of book writing too, I think, it's important to tell your reader how you are handling that. You know, these are names that I changed, not doing it more often than you have to, but letting people know what the deal is. Anybody else before we wrap up here?
Can you go through the publishing process? I published a book in 2000. Writing the book was a whole lot easier than getting it out there.
that's true.
Did you self-publish? Did you publish through a small press, a larger publisher?
It was a small national press.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a real big thing. I sent it out to several places. I think I sent it to an agent. One of my writing group people, Joan Legal, said, you know, I belong to the Wisconsin Writers Association, and I have too in the past. She says, you know, they take, you know, manuscripts, and so I just as well send it there. And I did. I got an email from them, and so after some rejections, which if you're a writer, you get used to those. Luckily, the Wisconsin Writers Association, which is a small press, took it on, and I
Supplied you with an editor.
yes, they did. They gave me an editor. I do most of my promotional things, and thanks to Marja here for helping with this. But yeah, it's a small press, but I'm about as busy as I want to be. I have talked locally to groups and such, and I've got a few things coming up at libraries, at Purtashine and some other places. But anyway, yeah, the publishing part and promoting part is a whole other. I love the writing, but I also like it when people read what I wrote too. That's fun. I've gotten so many emails and encouragement from this that I'm really glad I did it.
Well, and you know, we've talked about all the things that change with time. And one thing that has changed, I think, is what it means to self-publish a book. You know, that used to be called the vanity press, and it just did not have a very good reputation, and often deservedly so. But I think with technological gains, you still have to be careful that you're not getting ripped off, basically. But there are any number of quality self-publishers where if your purpose is mostly to write a book maybe for future generations in your family or to distribute to a circle of family and friends, maybe to leave a few copies at different libraries, but being published, it doesn't matter to you so much how the book comes into the world. You just want to have something there. That is not a bad way to go for some people. It can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. And even just how it looks oftentimes is much better than it used to be. And I think for some people, for their purposes, that's a way they can guarantee getting what they've written between two covers and maybe an electronic version and in the hands of the people they want to read it.
I think Michael Perry is doing that now too, if you're familiar with him. I took a workshop with him on writing too, long time ago. But anyway, he's doing that now too because he has more control, he said, when he's, you know, he chooses who he wants printing, who he wants editing. He, you know, has more control over who's doing certain jobs having to do with the book.
And he's a popular author who has done it both ways, and
Yes, he has.
so he speaks from experience. He's wonderful, by the way, and Anne, you're here. Anne, who's been involved with one of my favorite book festivals, the Tucson Festival of Books, every spring. And I was there one year after my book had come out, The Mockingbird Next Door, and Michael Perry was there, David Marinus. There's always kind of a posse of Wisconsin writers because of that connection in part. But I always think of this when I'm early, if I'm not in Wisconsin and I'm with a group of people and I'm the first one to get to the form of transportation we're taking. And I remember there were several of us who were all in the same hotel, some from Wisconsin and others not. And sure enough, it was about 5 minutes before this shuttle bus was to take people back to the hotel, but there was a fun event that was still going on that we'd been attending. And the Wisconsin people were there on time, and nobody else was. And Michael Perry said, yes, yes, this is the Wisconsin group that is punctual to a fault.
Very true.
Yeah, yeah. He's a wonderful person. If you ever have a chance, I don't know him, but I've heard him speak, and he does give talks and kind of an evening with Michael Perry kind of presentations around the state. He's a fun one.
He
to
was
go listen to.
delightful in this little workshop. I took it in Mineral Point on Shake Rag Alley. And there were just like 10 of us in this workshop. It was just wonderful. And I wrote, because I kind of wanted to be noticed a little bit. And so I wrote a blog about, because while he would talk, he reminded me so much of Donny Osmond. Don't ask me why. He'd come out with this toothy grin and have these, just, so I wrote a little blog and compared him to Donny Osmond, and he got a kick out of that. So he put on his own blog then too, and so.
And he has this kind of wry humor
He
about
does.
Wisconsin rural life, and you do in a lot of these stories. I think, education theory can be kind of dry, and yet so much of this is not theory but practice, which, as we've all discovered the hard way, often are not the same thing. And I love the humor that you infuse
Well, thank you.
in
I
a lot of these stories.
believe in humor. It's good.
Yep, and often necessary.
Yes, it is.
Sue and I both are going to sit here. We're happy to talk to people. Jocelyn, is this about the right time you want to? Okay. So we would love to talk to anybody who comes up with more questions or just to say hi. If anybody's interested in my memoir classes, I welcome people of all abilities. There's information about that here. Sue has, you've got 3 books, I think, and we'll be selling those. I have copies of my one and only. So please come up and either say hi or find a book or ask a question, whatever you'd like to do. Love to chat one-on-one. And I have to say, Middleton Library does a beautiful job with these, and thank you so much for hosting us tonight. Middleton is a good place to come for book events. And a celebration of somebody who had an idea and made it happen between 2 covers.
I can't believe it yet. So it's fun. I had to pinch myself here.
Yep. All right.
Thank you so much. Great
If I didn't know
Thank
what a
you.
good introduction I was going to get. Oh, thank you, Jocelyn. Oh, my